Awesome Mayo here. In today's WBE lesson, keep explaining stuff. The number one thing that will determine how far you go in life is your ability to gain compliance from people, and nothing will determine that more than the words that you use. Part of your dialogue is explaining your ideas. What you have to say is only as good as you are at saying it. Keep practicing, improving, and using your dialogue again and again. Never quit. The way you talk about what you do changes what you do. You know, there is a piece of technology that has always amazed me. Even after I learned about the magic behind it, I was even more impressed, and the story behind this great invention is a lesson for you and me both. About 140 years ago, a physics teacher from Italy, not me, another one, was impressed with the way that people were able to send messages long distances by using a wire. He had an idea to send images in the same way, to send images long distances over a wire by using a wire. And that's what he called it, sending images, sending pictures. And part of his brilliance was what he called it. Now at the time, this was an unheard of idea, and the genius of his method was the simplicity. I'm going to explain it to you right now in the exact same way that he explained it. Here's how to send images. Here's how to do the impossible. First, an image would be put on tin foil with ink. Then an electrically charged stylus would scan the foil by making parallel lines over every inch, the way you would use a lawnmower. Now as the stylus passed over the tin foil, the foil would conduct the electricity from the stylus as it passed those sections, but when the stylus passed the sections of ink, the charge would not be conducted and the stylus would send a small electric charge. Get it? Now these signals were sent to a synchronized stylus in another location. Now this second stylus was filled with ink, and it would scan a blank piece of paper in the exact same way that the original stylus was scanning the tin foil. And when it got a charge of electricity, it would release the ink on the paper. What would result is an exact copy of the image, miles away. Brilliant, right? And what a sharp guy to have made something so simple and so powerful, and to have done it in the 1850s is even more remarkable. But his real genius, and the takeaway lesson for us all, was much deeper. His name was Giovanni Caselli, and his idea would go on to change the world. But Caselli's genius wasn't limited to the invention itself. Aside from his work on sending images, he also studied electromagnetism, electrochemistry, and a whole bunch of other super smart stuff. And he combined these ideas and he wrote a book called The Recreation. And in this book, he explained complex and groundbreaking physics concepts, but he explained it in normal people terms, and that was his genius, making the complex very simple. That's what all of your dialogue should do. It's not just genius for him, but that's the ultimate definition of genius in general, making the complex simple. It's a powerful lesson in dialogue. What you have to say is only as good as you are at saying it. Speaking over the heads of your audience is an easy trap to fall into because it makes you feel, and others will sometimes think, that you actually are smarter. But real genius has a much higher measure, making other people feel smarter. Instead of trying to feel smart, your words, your dialogue should make other people feel smarter. It was Caselli's dialogue, his ability to explain and show his concepts so well. That's why he was able to impress the world's most powerful men. Leaders of the world clamored to finance his experiments. The Grand Duke of Tuscany, Leopold II, was an investor. So was Napoleon III. He brought Caselli in and made him a French commodity until Russia took over, and then Tsar Nicholas set up Caselli's machine and sent thousands of image transmissions, sometimes over 100 an hour. The machine was incredible. And it was Caselli's dialogue, the way that he explained it, how he spread the word. That was the key to his success. Think about the explanation I had when I talked about the stylus moving over ink and tin foil, and then sending a charge when it moved over ink, but not when it moved over the tin foil. The explanation of that machine, it's short, it's simple, it's easy to follow, and it's totally brilliant. I copied it almost word for word from his explanation. And it was this idea that he got a patent on a full 10 years before Bell got his patent on the telephone. Now, Caselli's invention would eventually become what we know today as the fax machine. That's right. Caselli figured out a way to send faxes over 140 years ago. And he actually got a patent. He got a patent on his fax machine over a decade before the patent on the telephone. So he was so brilliant ahead of his time that it took over 100 years before Xerox understood the technology and made the fax machine an everyday item. Caselli was over 100 years ahead of his time. 100 years. Think of it this way. Abraham Lincoln could have sent and received a fax. So it makes you wonder, right? What happened? When the fax machine eventually did come around, it was a game changer. And it was based on this underlying idea, the idea of sending diverse types of information over a wire. This idea is what the entire internet is based on. So Caselli's mark on history is prominent and permanent. But again, why did it take over 100 years to catch on? Well, unfortunately, as good as Caselli was with his dialogue and conveying his ideas, as brilliant as he was, for some reason, he stopped pursuing his fax machine obsession. Even though he had some of the richest and most influential men in the world as his clients, and he could have kept his machine on the forefront of public attention, he let the idea go, and unknown to him, he left this life-changing device to go through a century of obscurity. A real testament to Caselli's skill and his dialogue is what happened after he stopped pursuing the idea. Because you may think that the fax machine is so brilliant that it did not need to be accompanied by the proper positioning or dialogue, right? But if that were true, why did it immediately fall into oblivion right after Caselli quit chasing the idea? This tells us that he himself, he was a major role. It shows you how important the right dialogue is, the right method of explaining. It also shows you the price of stopping. To get an idea of the opportunity cost, let's look at something else. Since the fax machine was made possible by the invention of the telegraph, let's look at the other end of the spectrum, at a business that the telegraph destroyed, and something that everybody in America is taught about: the Pony Express. Think for a second about what you've been told and taught about the Pony Express. If you were raised in America, at least if you went to school in America, we've been taught a lot about this, right? This was a delivery service where men rode on horseback to deliver messages. It meant that a message could travel from the East Coast to the West Coast in a record of just 10 days. And most people, if you were to ask them, would say very flattering things about the Pony Express. How it was a wonderfully effective service. You'll hear stories about men spending generations fighting off criminals and bandits and hooligans as they rode to deliver messages. People will go on to talk about how the Pony Express was a brilliant operation that lasted for decades and generations and changed the world, right? Well, in reality, almost none of that is true. The Pony Express as a business enterprise and as an operation was a total disaster. It was only in existence for about 18 months, and in that time, it cost investors millions of dollars in today's money. It was too expensive to use, it was mismanaged, and once the telegraph came around, the Pony Express went out of business in just a few months. But that's not what people remember, is it? That's not the story that's told. And that's because of this guy. He became a rider in the Pony Express at the age of 14 because he had to support his family after his father died of illnesses and complications from stab wounds he got after speaking out against slavery. And this young rider loved to talk. His teenage days as a rider were limited, but afterward he kept telling stories of his adventures in the great American West. He would even go on to start a traveling show that glorified his stories. And these shows were a huge hit and became popular not just in America, but throughout Europe. And the stories spread around the world. He spread the story. His shows were about cowboys and Indians and hunting, and he made himself, his experience in the Pony Express, cultural icon. His name was William Cody, also known as Buffalo Bill. And he had some real badass in him that most people don't know about or appreciate. One of those things was Buffalo Bill's activism. Remember, his father was irreversibly wounded from a stabbing that he got after he spoke out against slavery? Well, Buffalo Bill had that same spirit. He admired the native Indians and he didn't treat them as criminals. He called them the former foe, present friend, the American. He went on to point out the at the time controversial idea that every Indian outbreak that he had seen was a result of broken promises and broken treaties by the government. And in his shows, he made sure that he humanized the native Indians and depicted them not only as warriors but also as affectionate family people. And he also said that women should be allowed to work, and if they do it as well as men, give them the same pay. What? Yeah. And this was, 100 years before burning bras was cool. And the positions he took drew fire, but he didn't care, or at least he didn't care enough to stop. He pushed on. So he really was a social leader, and few people realize the humanitarian and social contribution he had. He did some really cool stuff. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that this is an interesting study, isn't it? Take a look at these two men, Caselli and his fax machine, and Buffalo Bill and his Pony Express days. Both of these men reached success because of one thing: their dialogue, their words. It was the way they told their story. The words they used to explain their ideas. Their words, that was the difference. But when you look at these two men, there are some other big differences too, right? One guy made history, advanced science, and helped change the world, and the other guy was part of an outdated and failed venture. Yet, which story are we still talking about and even still taught today? What was the difference? And it's interesting because both of them kind of did the same thing. They both worked on getting messages, getting something from one place to another. And they did this around the same time. But one's work, the better one, is forgotten and the other is legendary. So again, what was the difference? It wasn't just their dialogue, but it was something even more important. There's one thing that Caselli didn't do that Buffalo Bill did do. He kept talking. For whatever reason, Caselli stopped pursuing his invention, even though it was a huge success. And the Pony Express failed massively, but Buffalo Bill kept it going. He kept telling the story. He kept his dialogue going. He didn't stop, and that made all the difference. What would have happened if Caselli kept at it the way that Bill Cody did? How different would things have turned out? How different would we look at the fax machine and the story behind it? Would it be as taut and as great as the Pony Express? As Alexander Graham Bell? All this could have been answered if the dialogue continued. So the dialogue was important, but keeping it going, continuing to improve it, even if the initial idea was a failure like the Pony Express was, keeping it going is important. It can mean the difference between kids today still being taught about the Pony Express and never hearing about the world's first fax being sent more than a decade before Alexander Graham Bell got his telephone patent. It's just like an amazing thing to hear, right? A fax was successfully sent before that. And I often give, whenever we talk about stuff like this, I usually give real life examples of people executing stuff that we talk about. Right now, I'll tell you about Rachel Case. She was a real estate agent. Rachel was her student, not mine, but I still get to brag about her, and you're going to see why I picked her a little bit later. She heard about this when she learned about what we just talked about, this, keep explaining stuff, and Caselli and the Pony Express. Here's what she did. Her and her partner suddenly found themselves going out of business. The real estate business was going under, and it was getting worse every day, and everybody on their team had all but quit. Her situation seemed hopeless, and it would have for almost anybody. It was totally nuts, and she didn't know what to do. But this idea of dialogue and explaining stuff was on her mind. And one day she heard something that changed her life. It was one word, a single word. She was talking to a buyer who was about to make an offer on a house. The price was $500,000, but the buyer offered $515,000. She wondered why the buyer would offer more than the asking price, so she said, $515,000? The buyer replied with one word: furnished. The buyer was making an offer to buy all the furniture as well. And it got her thinking, and that was the day that she and Millie invented a whole new model. Because think about what happened. The buyer was making an offer to buy the furniture in the house, and it happened on accident, but imagine if you could do that on purpose. So buying $15,000 worth of furniture is usually a big deal, but not so much when you're spending $500,000 at the same time. So you could easily start adding the option to buy the furniture whenever a buyer makes an offer to buy a house, right? That would be easy. And you see how that works, right? It's not hard to follow. If someone buys a house, a buyer wants to buy a house, you add on the furniture. You can add on the furniture. They can add on the furniture. But what about if the house doesn't sell? This started a whole new thought process, because of course they can make money by selling the furniture with the house, but what if they sold the furniture without the house? And what if they did that several times over and over and over again, several times over from the same house? You see where this is going. So consider an open house, for example. The average, less than 10% of houses sell through an open house. The average buyer can look at 20 to 30 houses before they buy one. So if you have an open house, many of the buyers will buy a house, and buy a house soon. And a lot of those people will come through, and they're actually going to buy a house, but just not that house. But you still have this flow of people who are about to buy a house, and many of them also want to buy new furniture too. So you have a source of home buyers, but you also have a source of potential furniture buyers as well. You see what I'm saying? So let's say you have 100 buyers come through a house. Only one of them will get the house, but many more of them also want to buy furniture. So if you have furniture right there at the house that they can buy, then the same pieces of furniture can be sold again and again from one house, and not just to the buyer of the house. And actually, the buyer of the house doesn't even need to buy the furniture. You don't even need a buyer of the house. Does that make sense? This is exactly how Rachel started, and she worked with furniture stores who would come through and furnish the open houses. That's how it started. And then they got better and better and better. They started getting better at this. And then they started doing something else that was just awesome. It's a huge secret, and I'll get into it in a second. But first, I want to go over what's happening here. It's so simple that anybody can do it. It's brilliant. I just love this kind of stuff. So let's make sure we're on the same page. Here's how this worked. They would target high-end homes where the buyers are more likely to want to buy newer and nicer furniture when they buy their new home. Then they do an open house. The furniture stores would come. They would stock the houses with their best stuff. And when the buyers would come through, obviously they could make an offer and buy the house if they wanted to. But many more people bought furniture pieces for their new house, or maybe their current house, because sometimes the people coming through don't want to buy a house at all. They just want to get design ideas. So these open houses started moving furniture. And as Rachel got better at these open houses, she started moving more and more furniture. The momentum started picking up, and pretty soon she was making money. Then she was making as much money as she was in real estate, and then even more money from the furniture than she was making from the real estate. The real estate itself became irrelevant. So then these two nutcases, Millie and Rachel, they started doing something brilliant. It's a huge secret, the one that I mentioned a second ago. This is just nutsos. And it's just think about what's happening for a second. All you really need, what do you really need? Because think about what's happening here for a second. All you really need, all you really want to focus on are people who want furniture, right? Not necessarily the real estate's becoming less and less important to a point where it's obsolete. So what you really want are people who want furniture. So what did they start doing? Furniture auctions. So these open houses weren't just for the houses, but they also became for the furniture itself. And this was a huge breakthrough, because now a lot more people started coming through, and they were bidding on different pieces. And it became such an attraction that the furniture stores, this is the crazy part, the furniture stores started paying upfront just for the chance, just for the opportunity to supply furniture for the auctions. It was a great way to move a lot of pieces. So on top of getting paid a percentage of all the business that was done at the auction, they also got paid up front just for picking the store to be the supplier for the open house. Does that make sense? So that's how you handle the furniture on one hand. On the other hand, to keep a steady flow of these open houses with the right type of homes, they were hiring real estate agents to do showings on their own listings. So the agent would go out, they would promote the house and the auction, and then they would host the showing, handle the people that came through, they would handle all the buyers, everything was explained to them on how to deal with this, and they would handle it. So really take a step back and think about this process for a second. On one hand, you have furniture stores not only paying you points on the business that they do, but also paying you up front to get access to your real estate / furniture buyers. Then, on the other hand, you take a small slice of that money that you just got and you have your agents go bring you those real estate / furniture buyers that, you see what I'm saying? The realtors are bringing you the people, the agents are bringing you the people that you just got paid to get. So every week, they had more and more people being sent to them that wanted to buy furniture. Soon they didn't even need to do open houses. They had enough people just to send them to the stores to do clearance sales or specials just for their people. And also another cool thing was that sometimes, the actual house would sell. Some of the people that wanted to buy the furniture also wanted to buy the house that the furniture was in. But the money that came from that was just gravy. But the concept, the idea, and the whole business had changed. So any money that came from that, from the actual real estate, was just, the cherry on top. It was nutsos. And you may recognize this example because this is how Rachel Kays was able to go from broke and nearly out of business to making over, you ready for this? Doesn't get old if you've already heard about her, $8,000 a week. $8,000 a week from doing what we just talked about. $8,000 a week. $8,000 a week. I love it. I love it. I love it. Actually, Millie did an interview with her to pick apart exactly what she was doing. And then I talked to her, and she said that it was after hearing this discussion, hearing us talk about this Buffalo Bill Caselli thing, that she did all this. So I asked her what she meant by that and I asked her to explain it. And she told me that she was paying attention, that it was only after that she started paying attention to the importance of dialogue. And that's when she picked up on that tiny word, furnished. And then when she started the model, she was having problems at first. She really wanted to quit, but then she got a little better with her dialogue, a little better at explaining what she was doing, and it made all the difference. Here's what I mean. After refining her dialogue and her compliance gaining ability, when she called a furniture store, here's what she would say. When I do an open house, some of our buyers want to buy furniture in bulk right then and there. Also, some of the other people who come through the house want to buy individual pieces for their homes as well. And that's some of the dialogue she used, right? You see how simple that is. It's deceptively simple and brilliant. Remember, genius is explaining things very simply. How simple was that explanation? So that's one part, right? What about with the agents, the people that are going to handle the other side of the transaction? Remember the word that I used earlier when I explained it to you, when I told you what they were doing? That's the exact word that they used and how they positioned it. She was hiring real estate agents to do open houses with their own listings. Remember, that's the word I used. Hiring real estate agents. Hiring. You're hiring agents to do open houses on their own listings. What kind of compliance do you think you'd get when you word things that way? Think about how simple and attractive that is. That's how they explain what they were doing to each of the parties involved. Imagine the kind of compliance you get when you explain things with that kind of surgical precision, Terminator precision. Call 1,000 agents or 1,000 furniture stores and you'll get compliance every single time. It just takes a little skill and a little practice and get a little better at explaining things, and you can pull income out of thin air. And this is exactly how she did it. By changing how she explained things, by changing how she told her story, by changing her dialogue, changing how she talked about what she was doing, it actually changed what she did. She went from a real estate business that did furniture on the side to a furniture business that did real estate on the side. And what was her secret? Her dialogue, the words she started using. And also, she didn't quit. The way she explained it, she kept explaining stuff. By the way, there is something that I haven't told you about Rachel. For the people who know her, they might be surprised that I've left it out for this long. Remember when I said that she suddenly found herself going out of business and in a situation that seemed hopeless? Well, that had nothing to do with the economy or the real estate market. Actually, it never does, but in this case, I especially mean it. Because Rachel's business was already suffering, it was already going downhill, it was already nosediving, and then she got into an accident and she was paralyzed from the waist down. So everything that I just said, everything that we've been talking about this entire time about Rachel, everything, she did it all from a hospital bed or from her bedroom at home. This is why most of her employees started to quit. Even her partner left because everybody knew that if you can't leave a hospital room or leave your house, then there's no way you can make it in real estate, in the competitive world of real estate, right? And since the business was already in trouble before she was paralyzed, they weren't crazy for thinking it was game over, right? We won't judge them too much. But Rachel refused to accept that. And that's why she focused so much on the power of dialogue, because she felt like that's all she had. Just her words. That's exactly what she told me. It's all I had. My words. My words is all I had. And everything I just said, everything that we just talked about, everything. I want to say that again. She did everything. Everything we've said, from $0 to $8,000 a week, it was all done from a hospital bed or her family room / bedroom at home. Everything. She built this entire empire just using her words, her dialogue, her refusal to quit, getting better at explaining stuff. Do you guys see why our stuff is the best in the world? Oh my goodness. And the students are the best in the world too. Rachel, you're a badass. I love you. We all do. Okay, and we are way past our time today, kids. Remember, every business has an idea like the fax machine, a piece of buried brilliance that can go underdeveloped for the next 100 years. So you should always make sure to isolate and extract the brilliance that's in each and every person you come across. Make them feel smarter, not just by the way you talk, but by the way that you help them think. Remember, Caselli and Mr. Cody and their lifelong lessons. Always improve your dialogue, keep explaining stuff, never quit. And remember, this is all just the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. If you want me to personally train you one-on-one, then make sure that if and when we start accepting applications again, then you are all over it like an uncuffed crackhead. WeBuildEmpires.com. Also, if you don't get emails from me, make sure you go to CaptainBad.com and join the ranks. And lastly, remember this. If this circle represents all the potential that you think you have, there are only two kinds of people that you will ever meet in this world. Those that think that this circle should be bigger, and those that don't. Choose carefully. Okay, thanks so much for the support, and until next time, take care and God bless.